In psychology, an experiment has a special purpose. In psychology, the purpose of an experiment is to test a cause and effect hypothesis and to reach one or more cause and effect conclusions. An example of a cause and effect hypothesis might be sugar leads to hyperactivity in children. Another example of a cause and effect hypothesis might be frustration leads to aggression. So let's say I'm a psychologist and I'm doing an experiment to test the effect of sugar on hyperactivity in children. And maybe one group of children gets sugar in my experiment, and another group gets a similar drink without sugar in my experiment. And maybe I observe both groups of children for a certain amount of time. In that experiment, the hypothesis that I would be testing is sugar leads to hyperactivity in children. And in my experiment, one of three things will happen. The children who get the sugar might behave more hyper than the children who don't get the sugar, and my hypothesis might be supported. The children who don't get the sugar might behave more hyper than the children who do get the sugar, and the results might show the opposite of my hypothesis, and the data might support neither hypothesis. The data might go in neither direction. The two groups of children might behave about the same. There might be no significant difference in behavior between the two groups. So that's the purpose of an experiment in psychology and the goal of an experiment in psychology. I want to make sure that I'm clear about what I mean by cause and effect conclusion. When I use the phrase cause and effect conclusion in this class, what I'm actually meaning is cause and effect inference. So what's an inference? An inference is a conclusion that's reached without 100% certainty. Basically, an inference is a conclusion that's supported by the evidence that was gathered, but isn't a sure thing. An example of an inference in everyday life is the verdict in a jury trial. When a jury reaches a verdict of guilty or not guilty, that conclusion is just an inference. It's possible for a jury to send an innocent person to jail, and it's possible for a jury to let a guilty person go free. So, like I said, a jury verdict is just an inference. And when a cause and effect conclusion is reached at the end of an experiment, it's just an inference. It's just a conclusion that's supported by the data, but it's not guaranteed to be correct. You can never have 100% certainty in a psychology experiment. You can actually never have 100% certainty in any type of psychological study. And I'd like to quickly explain why it's not possible to have 100% certainty in a psychology experiment. The only way to have 100% certainty in a psychology experiment is to know that there's no differences between the groups of people you're comparing except for the conditions that you're manipulating. So let's say I'm doing the experiment on temperature that I described in the last part of this video, and one group is taking a memory test in a 60-degree room, and one group is taking the same memory test in an 80-degree room. If it turns out that the cold group does better than the hot group on the memory test, and I know that there's no differences between the two groups other than the fact that they're in different temperatures, then I can say with 100% certainty that the temperature of the room is what caused the cold group to outperform the hot group. If I know that the two groups are exactly the same, except for the fact that one group is in a cold room and one group is in a hot room, then I'm 100% sure that the temperature is what caused the difference in performance. Unfortunately, if I did that experiment, there's no way for me to be completely sure that the two groups are equal in every way except for temperature, because there's just so many ways that these two groups could be different from each other. One group could be a little bit more tired, one group could be a little bit less motivated, one group could be a little bit better at memorization in general. So there's no way for me to be 100% sure that the two groups are completely equal to each other. So I'm not going to have 100% certainty. There's always going to be room for doubt in that experiment or in any psychology experiment. So in the next part of this video, I'm going to talk about the steps that a researcher takes to reach a cause and effect inference in a psychology experiment. I'm going to talk about what's needed to confidently reach a cause and effect inference in a psychology experiment.